Have you ever wondered what really happens after midnight on Cemetery Hill? What if I told you that the ground there isn't just filled with old bones and forgotten names, but with secrets so dark, so twisted, that even the bravest souls refuse to speak of them? Tonight, you'll hear 3 true stories that have haunted this cursed hill for generations. Stories of restless spirits that whisper your name in the fog, of ghostly processions that mark the living for death, and of a girl in a willow dress whose sorrow can drag you into the grave with her. These aren't just tales, they're warnings, because once you hear what happened on Cemetery Hill, you'll never look at a graveyard the same way again. So turn off the lights, lock your doors, and listen closely. Every word you're about to hear is true, and if you feel a chill on your neck or hear a whisper in the dark, just remember, some stories don't end when the sun comes up. They follow you home. If I had never set foot on Cemetery Hill that night, maybe I'd still be able to sleep with the lights off. Maybe I wouldn't hear those whispers every time the wind blows. But I did go, and I saw what was buried beneath Old Man Harlan's grave. I wish I could forget, but the dead don't let go that easily. I never believed in ghost stories, not really. Sure, I'd heard the tales about Cemetery Hill, how the ground was cursed, how the dead there never rested easy, but I always thought it was just small-town gossip, the kind of thing people say to scare kids away from sneaking around at night. But that was before the summer of 2017, when I was 17 and stupidly brave. My best friend Jamie and I had just finished our last year of high school. We were bored, restless, and looking for something to do before college split us up. That's when Jamie dared me to spend a night on Cemetery Hill. "Come on, man," he grinned, flashlight in hand. "One night, we'll bring snacks, tell ghost stories, and prove we're not scared of some old graves." I laughed, but my heart thudded in my chest. There was something about Cemetery Hill that always felt off. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed to lean in, or how the fog clung to the ground even on warm nights, but I couldn't back down, not in front of Jamie. We packed a couple of sleeping bags, some chips, and a cheap bottle of whiskey Jamie had swiped from his dad. By midnight, we were climbing the rusted gate, our breath fogging in the cool air. The cemetery was silent except for the distant chirp of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. We set up near the oldest part of the graveyard where the stones were so worn you could barely read the names. That's where I first saw Old Man Harlan's grave. The stone was cracked, the name barely visible. Harlan, 1892-1967. Someone had left a wilted bouquet on the grave, but it looked like it had been there for months. Jamie nudged me. "That's the one, right? The grave everyone says is haunted?" I shrugged, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Supposedly. They say he was a grave digger. Died alone. Some people think he still wanders around at night looking for company." Jamie grinned, but I could see the nervous flicker in his eyes. "Let's see if he wants to join us." We settled in, telling stories and sipping whiskey. The night dragged on, and the fog thickened, curling around the tombstones like ghostly fingers. Around 2 a.m., Jamie dared me to touch Harlan's grave. "Just put your hand on it for 10 seconds. If you do, I'll buy you breakfast tomorrow." I rolled my eyes, but I crawled over and pressed my palm to the cold, cracked stone. The chills seeped into my skin, and for a moment I thought I heard something, a faint whisper, like someone muttering just below the surface. I jerked my hand back. "Did you hear that?" Jamie laughed. "Hear what? You're just trying to freak me out." But I knew what I'd heard, a voice, low and raspy, whispering my name. We tried to laugh it off, but the mood had shifted. The air felt heavier, and the shadows seemed to move when we weren't looking. Jamie suggested we try to get some sleep, but I couldn't close my eyes. Every time I did, I heard that whisper, growing louder, more insistent. Around 3 a.m., I sat up, shivering. The fog was so thick I could barely see Jamie's sleeping bag. That's when I noticed something strange. A patch of ground near Harlan's grave looked disturbed, like the earth had been dug up and hastily covered again. I nudged Jamie awake. "Look at that. Doesn't it look like someone's been digging?" He squinted, then shrugged. "Probably just an animal. or maybe the ground settling. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The whispers were louder now, swirling around me, filling my head with words I couldn't quite understand. I stood up, drawn to the disturbed earth. My feet moved on their own, crunching over dead leaves and broken twigs. I knelt down and brushed away the loose dirt. My fingers hit something hard, wood, old and splintered. Jamie hissed, "Dude, what are you doing?" But I couldn't stop. I dug deeper, my hands shaking. The whispers grew frantic, desperate. Suddenly, my fingers slipped into a gap, and the wood gave way with a sickening crack. A cold wind howled through the cemetery, and the ground beneath me seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. I fell back, gasping, as a foul stench rose from the broken earth. Jamie grabbed my arm. "Let's get out of here, man, now!" But I couldn't move. Something was crawling out of the hole, something pale and thin, with long, bony fingers and empty, hollow eyes. It dragged itself toward me, its mouth opening in a silent scream. The whispers became a roar, filling my head with terror. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Jamie was shouting, pulling me away, but I was frozen, staring into the face of Old Man Harlan. His lips moved, and I finally understood the words, "Stay with me, forever." The last thing I remember was the cold, clammy hand closing around my wrist, pulling me down into the darkness. I don't know how long I was trapped in that darkness. It felt like hours, maybe days. All I remember is the cold, the suffocating weight of earth pressing in on me, and the endless echoing whispers. They slithered through my mind, repeating my name over and over until I thought I'd go mad. I tried to scream, but dirt filled my mouth. I tried to move, but something held me tight, those bony, icy fingers clutching my wrist, refusing to let go. I could feel Old Man Harlan's presence, his face inches from mine, his breath colder than the grave. "Stay with me," he rasped, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "Stay forever." I thrashed, desperate to break free, but the more I struggled, the tighter his grip became. My vision blurred, and I felt myself slipping away, sinking deeper into the earth, into the darkness. Then, suddenly, a blinding light pierced the blackness. I heard Jamie's voice, distant but frantic, shouting my name. The grip on my wrist loosened just for a second, and I clawed my way upward toward the light, toward the sound of my friend's voice. I broke through the surface, gasping for air, coughing up dirt and blood. Jamie was there, his face pale with terror, his hands shaking as he pulled me out of the shallow grave. "Jesus, man, what happened? You just disappeared. I couldn't find you. I thought you were dead." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, my mind spinning. All I could do was stare at the broken earth, at the gaping hole where Old Man Harlan's grave had been. The fog had lifted, and the cemetery was eerily silent. No wind, no crickets, nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing. Jamie helped me to my feet, and we stumbled away from the grave, too scared to look back. We didn't speak as we climbed over the rusted gate and ran down the hill, our footsteps echoing in the empty night. I could feel something watching us, following us, but I didn't dare turn around. When we finally reached Jamie's house, we locked the doors and windows and sat in silence until the sun came up. I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, that I'd imagined the whole thing. But the dirt under my fingernails, the bruises on my wrist, and the lingering chill in my bones told me otherwise. For weeks after that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Old Man Harlan's face, heard his whispers in the darkness. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadows that moved when they shouldn't, pale figures standing at the edge of my vision. Jamie tried to act like nothing had happened, but I could tell he was scared too. He stopped answering my calls, stopped hanging out with me. It was like the cemetery had marked us and he wanted nothing to do with it. One night I woke up to the sound of whispering outside my window. I looked out and saw a figure standing at the edge of my yard, half hidden in the shadows. It was tall and thin, with hollow eyes that glowed in the moonlight. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, filling my room, my head, my soul. "Stay with me, forever." I slammed the window shut and hid under my covers, but the whispers didn't stop. They followed me everywhere, at school, at work, even in my dreams. I started to lose track of time, forgetting where I was, what I was doing. My friends said I looked pale, haunted, like I hadn't slept in weeks. One day, I got a call from Jamie's mom. She was crying, her voice shaking. Jamie had gone missing. He'd left a note on his bed, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "He's calling me. I have to go back." I knew exactly where he'd gone. I tried to warn the police, tried to tell them about the grave, the whispers, the thing that lived beneath Cemetery Hill, but they just looked at me like I was crazy. That night I went back to the cemetery. I had to find Jamie, had to save him before it was too late. The fog was thicker than ever, swirling around the tombstones like living things. The air was heavy with the stench of decay. I found Jamie's backpack near Harlan's grave, half buried in the dirt. The ground was freshly disturbed, the hole even deeper than before. I heard the whispers louder than ever, calling my name, calling Jamie's name. I saw his face, pale and terrified, staring up at me from the darkness. "Help me," he whispered, "please." I reached down trying to grab his hand, but something else grabbed me instead. Those same bony fingers, cold as death, pulling me down, down, down. I fought with everything I had, but it wasn't enough. The last thing I saw was Jamie's face, twisted in terror as the earth closed over us. I woke up in my own bed, covered in dirt, my hands raw and bleeding. Jamie was gone. The police never found his body. They said he must have run away, but I know the truth. Old man Harlan took him, and now every night I hear the whispers, calling me back to Cemetery Hill. I know one day I won't be able to resist. One day I'll go back, and when I do, I don't think I'll ever come out again. If I had listened to my grandmother's warnings, maybe I wouldn't be haunted by the faces I saw that night. Maybe I wouldn't wake up at 3 a.m. every morning, drenched in sweat, hearing the sound of shuffling feet outside my window. But I did go to Cemetery Hill and I saw the procession. Now I know some doors should never be opened and some secrets are meant to stay buried. Because once you witness the midnight procession, you're never truly alone again. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone and secrets didn't stay hidden for long. But there was one secret that nobody liked to talk about, the one that lived on Cemetery Hill. My grandmother used to say, "Never look out your window at midnight and never ever go near the cemetery after dark." She'd tell me stories about the dead walking, about shadows that moved on their own, but I always thought she was just trying to scare me. It wasn't until I was 19 that I learned the truth. It was the summer after my first year of college, and I was back home, bored out of my mind. My friends and I were desperate for something to do, so when Mark suggested we sneak up to Cemetery Hill at midnight, I didn't hesitate. We were young, stupid, and convinced nothing could hurt us. There were 4 of us that night, me, Mark, his girlfriend Priya, and our friend Sam. We parked at the bottom of the hill and made our way up the winding path, flashlights in hand. The air was thick and heavy, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under our feet. As we reached the top, the cemetery came into view. The old iron gate was half open, creaking in the wind. The gravestones stood like crooked teeth, some so old the names had worn away. The moon was full, casting long shadows that seemed to move when you weren't looking. Mark grinned, trying to lighten the mood. "So, who's ready to see some ghosts?" Priya rolled her eyes, but I could see she was nervous. Sam just laughed, but it sounded forced. We wandered among the graves, reading the names and making up stories about the people buried there. It was all fun and games until Priya stopped dead in her tracks. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. We all fell silent. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it too, a faint, rhythmic sound like footsteps shuffling through gravel. It was coming from the far side of the cemetery, near the oldest graves. Mark shone his flashlight in that direction, but the beam barely cut through the darkness. "Probably just an animal," he said, but his voice was shaky. We should have left right then, but curiosity got the better of us. We crept closer, the sound growing louder with every step. My heart pounded in my chest and my mouth went dry. The air felt colder, and I could see my breath, even though it was the middle of summer. As we rounded a row of crumbling headstones, we saw them. A line of figures dressed in tattered, old-fashioned clothes, moving in perfect unison. Their faces were pale and blank, eyes wide open but empty, as if they were looking right through us. They shuffled forward, their feet barely lifting off the ground, moving in a slow, endless procession. I froze, unable to look away. There must have been at least 20 of them, maybe more, all moving toward the center of the cemetery. None of them made a sound, except for the soft shuffle of their feet and the occasional creak of old bones. Priya grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "We need to go," she whispered, her voice trembling. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, hypnotized by the sight of the procession. I watched as they circled a large, cracked mausoleum at the heart of the cemetery. One by one, they stopped, turned to face the mausoleum, and bowed their heads. Then, as if on cue, the door of the mausoleum creaked open. A figure stepped out, taller than the others, dressed in a long black coat. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold and hungry. He raised a hand and the procession fell silent. The air grew even colder, and I felt a pressure in my chest like something was squeezing the life out of me. Mark finally snapped out of it. "Run," he shouted, grabbing Priya and pulling her away. Sam and I followed, stumbling over graves and tripping on roots. I could hear the shuffling footsteps behind us growing faster, more frantic. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw the procession breaking apart, the figures turning to follow us, their faces twisted in silent screams. We reached the gate and burst through, not stopping until we were halfway down the hill. Only then did we dare to look back. The cemetery was silent again, the procession gone, but I could still feel their eyes on me, watching from the shadows. We didn't speak on the drive home. Nobody wanted to admit what we'd seen. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard the sound of shuffling feet outside my window. I pulled the covers over my head and prayed for morning. The next day, Mark called me. His voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. "Did you see the man in the coat?" he asked. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah, I saw him." "I think he saw us too," Mark said. I think he marked us." I wanted to tell him he was being paranoid, that it was just our imagination. But deep down, I knew he was right. That night, I dreamed of the procession. I saw myself among them, my face pale and empty, shuffling endlessly through the cemetery. When I woke up, my feet were dirty as if I'd been walking outside. I tried to shake it off, but the dreams kept coming. Every night, I saw the procession. Every morning, I woke up more tired, more afraid. And then, one by one, my friends started to disappear. The first to vanish was Sam. He stopped answering texts, stopped showing up to work. His mom called me frantic, asking if I'd seen him. I lied and said no, but I knew the truth. I'd seen him the night before in my dream, shuffling along with the procession, his eyes wide and empty, his mouth open in a silent scream. A week later, Priya was gone too. Mark called me in the middle of the night, his voice shaking. "She's not answering. Her parents said she never came home. What's happening to us?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that every night the dreams got worse. The procession was growing. I recognized more faces, Sam, Priya, and others I didn't know. Sometimes I'd wake up standing at my window, the glass cold against my forehead, listening to the faint sound of shuffling feet outside. Mark and I tried to stay awake, tried to fight the pull of sleep, but it was useless. The dreams always found us. We started meeting up at all hours, just to make sure we weren't alone. We'd sit in Mark's car, parked far from Cemetery Hill, drinking coffee and talking about anything but that night. But the fear never left. It clung to us, heavy and suffocating. I started seeing things in the corners of my eyes, shadows that moved when they shouldn't, pale faces peering at me from the darkness. I stopped going out after sunset. I stopped sleeping. One night, Mark called me, his voice barely a whisper. "I can't do this anymore. I keep seeing them. I keep hearing them. I think they want me to join them." I tried to calm him down, but he hung up. I drove to his house as fast as I could, but when I got there, his room was empty. The window was open, the curtains fluttering in the breeze. On his bed was a single, dirty footprint. I was alone. That night, I locked every door and window, turned on every light, and sat in the middle of my room clutching a baseball bat. But it didn't matter. The dreams came anyway. This time, I was standing in the cemetery, surrounded by the procession. They moved around me, their faces blank and lifeless. The man in the black coat stood at the front, his eyes burning in the darkness. He raised his hand and the procession stopped. He pointed at me, and I felt a cold hand close around my heart. "Your turn," he whispered, his voice echoing inside my head. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figures closed in, their hands reaching for me, their mouths opening in silent screams. I felt myself being pulled forward, my feet dragging through the dirt. I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. My feet were filthy, covered in mud and dead leaves. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m., the witching hour. I tried to tell myself it was just a nightmare, but I knew better. I could still hear the shuffling feet, still feel the cold grip on my heart. The next day I went to my grandmother. I told her everything, the procession, the dreams, my friends disappearing. She listened in silence, her face pale and drawn. When I finished, she took my hand and pressed something cold and heavy into my palm, a small iron key. "This is the only way," she whispered. "You have to lock the mausoleum. If you don't, the procession will never stop. But you must go alone, and you must go at midnight. If you see the man in the coat, don't look into his eyes. No matter what you hear, don't stop walking." I wanted to refuse, to run away and never look back, but I knew I didn't have a choice. If I didn't end this, I'd be next. That night, I made my way up Cemetery Hill, the key clutched tight in my fist. The air was thick with fog and the moon was hidden behind clouds. The cemetery was silent, but I could feel eyes watching me from the shadows. I found the mausoleum at the center of the cemetery, its door hanging open. The procession was already there, circling the building, their faces turned toward me. The man in the black coat stood at the entrance, his eyes burning with cold fire. I forced myself to walk forward, my legs trembling. The whispers grew louder, filling my head with promises and threats. I kept my eyes on the ground, refusing to meet the man's gaze. As I reached the door, he stepped aside, his hand brushing my shoulder. His touch was ice cold, and I felt a jolt of pain shoot through my body. I shoved the key into the lock and turned it. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and the whispers stopped. The procession froze, their faces twisting in agony. One by one, they crumbled to dust, their bodies dissolving into the night air. The man in the coat let out a scream that shook the ground, then vanished into the darkness. I stood there alone, the key still warm in my hand. I thought it was over. I thought I was free. But every night at exactly 3 a.m., I wake up to the sound of shuffling feet outside my window. Sometimes I see faces in the darkness, familiar faces, lost faces, waiting for me to join them. I know the procession is still out there, waiting for the door to open again. And I know one day I won't be able to resist the call. If I had never seen her, maybe I could have lived a normal life. Maybe I wouldn't be afraid of willow trees or the sound of a girl crying in the wind. But I did see her, the girl in the willow dress, and now, no matter where I go, I know she's waiting for me. Because once you meet her eyes, you're marked, and Cemetery Hill is only the beginning. I never believed in curses, not until the night I saw the girl in the willow dress. It started as a dare, like most bad ideas do. My cousin Rhea was visiting from the city, and she'd heard all the stories about Cemetery Hill. She was fearless, or at least she pretended to be. I was the opposite. Quiet, careful, always the one to say maybe we shouldn't. But that night, I let her talk me into it. We waited until my parents were asleep, then snuck out with nothing but a flashlight and a bag of chips. The air was thick and humid, the kind of night where the crickets never stop and the trees seem to whisper to each other. Rhea was excited, practically skipping up the hill, but I felt a knot in my stomach that only got tighter the closer we got. Cemetery Hill was old, older than the town itself, some people said. The graves at the top were so worn you couldn't read the names, and the willow trees that grew there were twisted and gnarled, their branches hanging low like curtains. My grandmother used to say the willows were planted to keep the dead from wandering, but I always thought they looked like they were reaching for something. We climbed over the fence and crept between the graves, our flashlight beam bouncing off the stones. Rhea laughed, trying to scare me with ghost stories, but I barely heard her. I kept looking at the willows, half expecting to see something move behind the branches. We found a spot near the biggest willow and sat down, eating chips and daring each other to touch the oldest gravestone. The air was heavy, and the silence felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. That's when we heard it, a soft, high-pitched sobbing coming from somewhere behind the willow tree. Rhea's eyes widened. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my heart pounding. The crying grew louder, echoing through the branches. It sounded like a little girl, lost and alone. Rhea stood up, her voice shaky. "Hello? Is someone there?" The crying stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then slowly, a figure stepped out from behind the willow. She looked about our age, maybe a little younger. Her skin was pale, almost glowing in the moonlight, and her hair hung in tangled waves around her face. But it was her dress that caught my eye, long and white, made of something that looked like willow leaves, swaying even though there was no wind. She stared at us with wide, empty eyes. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Rhea took a step forward. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The girl's mouth opened wider, and the crying started again, louder this time, almost a wail. I felt a cold rush of air, and the branches of the willow tree began to shake. I grabbed Rhea's arm. "We need to go, now." But Rhea wouldn't move. She was staring at the girl, her eyes glazed over like she was in a trance. The girl in the willow dress took a step closer, her feet barely touching the ground. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt something cold and sharp stab into my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't look away. She whispered something, her voice like wind through dead leaves. "Stay with me." I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. The world spun and the willow branches seemed to close in around us. Suddenly, Rhea snapped out of it. She grabbed my hand and yanked me backward, breaking the girl's gaze. We ran, stumbling over graves and roots, the sound of crying chasing us all the way to the fence. We didn't stop until we were back in my room, the door locked and the curtains drawn. We sat in silence, listening to the wind rattle the windows. Rhea finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you see her eyes? They were empty." I nodded, shivering. She wanted us to stay. We tried to convince ourselves it was just a trick of the light, or maybe a lost girl playing a prank, but deep down, we both knew the truth. That night I dreamed of the willow tree. I saw the girl standing beneath its branches, her dress swaying, her eyes fixed on mine. She reached out, her fingers long and thin, and whispered, "Come back." I woke up gasping, my heart racing. Rhea was already awake, staring at the ceiling. "I dreamed about her too," she said. "She was calling me." We promised each other we wouldn't go back, but the next day we found willow leaves scattered on my windowsill, even though the nearest tree was a mile away. Over the next week, things got worse. I started seeing the girl everywhere, in reflections, in the corner of my eye, even in my dreams. Rhea stopped sleeping, her eyes ringed with dark circles. We both heard the crying at night, sometimes right outside the window. One evening, Rhea disappeared. I found her standing in the backyard, staring up at the moon, her feet bare and her hair tangled with willow leaves. "She's calling me," Rhea whispered. "She wants me to come back." I dragged her inside, but she fought me, her eyes blank and distant. That night, I locked our bedroom door and pushed a dresser in front of it, but I still heard the crying, louder than ever, echoing through the house. I knew we couldn't run from her. The girl in the willow dress had marked us, and she wasn't going to let us go. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, standing beneath the willow, her dress swaying, her eyes hollow and endless. The crying never stopped. It seeped through the walls, through the floor, through my dreams. I woke up to find Rhea sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the window, her lips moving silently. I shook her, desperate. "Rhea, please, snap out of it. She's not real. She can't hurt us." But Rhea just looked at me, her eyes glassy. She's waiting. She says I belong to her now. I tried to keep her inside all day, but by evening, she was restless, pacing the room, glancing at the door every few minutes. The sun set and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow longer, darker. I could feel the girl's presence pressing in on us, suffocating. At midnight, the crying grew louder, echoing through the house. Rhea stood up, her movements stiff and unnatural. She walked to the window and pressed her hand against the glass. "She's here," she whispered. I looked outside and felt my blood run cold. The willow tree in our backyard was swaying, even though there was no wind. And beneath it stood the girl in the willow dress, her face turned up to the window, her eyes locked on mine. I grabbed Rhea's arm, but she was ice cold. She turned to me, her voice distant. "I have to go. She needs me." Before I could stop her, she unlocked the door and slipped outside. I ran after her, barefoot and shaking, the night air biting at my skin. The grass was wet, and the ground felt soft, almost spongy beneath my feet. Rhea walked straight to the willow tree, her steps slow and deliberate. The girl in the willow dress reached out, her fingers brushing Rhea's cheek. For a moment, everything was silent. Then Rhea collapsed, her body crumpling to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. I screamed and ran to her, but the girl was gone. The willow branches hung still and the crying faded into the night. Rhea's eyes fluttered open and she looked at me, confused and terrified. "She showed me things," she whispered. "Terrible things. She's trapped and she wants us to take her place." I helped Rhea inside and we locked every door and window, but the feeling of dread never left. We tried to tell my parents, but they just thought we were having nightmares. Nobody believed us. The next day, Rhea was different. She barely spoke, barely ate. She spent hours staring at the willow tree, her fingers tracing patterns on the window pane. I tried to distract her, but nothing worked. The crying started earlier that night, and this time it was inside the house. I found Rhea in the hallway, her eyes wide and unblinking. She was whispering to herself over and over, "She's coming, she's coming." I followed the sound of crying to the living room. The air was freezing, and the lights flickered. The girl in the willow dress stood in the corner, her hair hanging over her face, her dress dripping with dew. She looked up at me, and I felt my legs buckle. "Why won't you stay?" she whispered, her voice echoing in my head. I tried to run, but the room spun around me. The walls seemed to close in, and the crying grew so loud it felt like my skull would split open. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, begging her to stop. Suddenly, everything went silent. I looked up, and the girl was gone. Rhea was standing over me, her face pale and drawn. "She wants us to come back to the cemetery," Rhea said. "She says it's the only way." I didn't want to go, but I knew we had no choice. The girl wouldn't stop until we faced her. We packed a bag with salt, iron nails, anything we could think of to protect ourselves, and waited for midnight. The walk to Cemetery Hill felt like a funeral march. The air was thick with fog and the willow trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching for us. The cemetery was silent, the gravestones barely visible in the moonlight. We found the biggest willow and stood beneath its branches. The girl appeared, her dress rustling, her eyes full of sorrow. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice shaking. She pointed to a grave at the base of the tree. The stone was cracked and covered in moss, the name worn away. "They forgot me," she whispered. "No one remembers. I'm so lonely." Rhea knelt by the grave, her hands trembling. "What do you want?" The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Say my name. Remember me." I brushed the moss from the stone, but the letters were almost gone. I could barely make out the name. "Lila." "Lila," I whispered. "Your name is Lila." The wind picked up, and the willow branches danced above us. The girl smiled, and for a moment, she looked almost alive. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and fading. "Don't forget me." She vanished, and the crying stopped. The air felt lighter, and the willow tree stood still. We walked home in silence, exhausted but relieved. Rhea slept through the night for the first time in days. I thought it was over. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the sound of willow branches tapping at my window. And every now and then, I see a girl in a white dress standing beneath the tree, watching, waiting. Because once you meet her eyes, you're marked, and Cemetery Hill is only the beginning. And there you have it, 3 of the most disturbing, true horror stories from Cemetery Hill. Each tale is a reminder that some places hold secrets darker than we can ever imagine, and sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. Whether it's the restless dead, a cursed procession, or a spirit longing to be remembered, Cemetery Hill has claimed more than its share of souls. So the next time you pass an old graveyard at night, remember these stories and think twice before you step inside. Which story haunted you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more spine-chilling true horror stories. Stay safe and beware the whispers in the dark.